tired today. I'm really tired. Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather. On this channel I talk about books, social justice, history, politics, and I'm new to BookTube. So if you want to learn more about me, I have a BookTube newbie tag that you can check out and I'll link it down below. I am so happy you're joining me today because today I'm going to be talking about my 2022 reading goals and doing a little bit of a January-February reading wrap up. So we're going to start off with my 2022 reading goals. I have 5 goals in total. I think they're achievable. We'll find out. First goal is I want to read 26 books this year. Last year I read 18 books, which was honestly amazing for me considering I wasn't reading after I came out of grad school. It took me about a year to get back into reading for fun. So last year I started reading in like June or July, and I was able to finish 18 books in, what was that, 5 months? Can I do math? 5 months. So this year I want to do 26 books, which is about 1 book every 2 weeks. And so far, I've been really like exceeding that goal. I'm looking at the stack of books that I've read so far and I'm really proud of myself. So yeah, so I want to do 26 books this year, but if I keep reading at the pace I'm reading, I'll probably be reading about a book a week. So the second goal is I want to read more of the books that I already have on my shelves. So a lot of them are nonfiction or like academic adjacent, and even if I'm really into a specific topic and I want to learn more, it slows down my reading pace and I can only read so much at a time. So this goal I think will be a little bit harder, but maybe manageable. There's a few books. There is some fiction. I need to stop spending money on books. I spend so much money on books. So my third goal is I want to read more books by Black, Indigenous, Asian, Latinx, and LGBTQ authors, especially in magical realism, in space operas, and the romance genre. Okay, goal number 4 I am really excited about. It is to read more audiobooks. I have never read an audiobook before, and I know I'm missing out like big time. So I really want to be able to read like while I'm cooking, or while I'm going on a walk, or while I'm gardening, or working out, what have you. I think it'd be a nice break from all the podcasts I listen to, and there are so many books that I want to read this year that I think having audiobooks would be really helpful. Goal number 5 is I want to read more of the books that are on my Puerto Rico culture and history TBR. Yeah, there's so much more I want to read about Puerto Rico, and I think this one might be a little hard because, like I just said, me and nonfiction are frenemies. We are friends to lovers. We do not get along at first. So there's a lot I want to learn, but I know it's going to take some time for me to get through the books that I want to read. Okay, so let's get into my January-February wrap-up. I'm going to start off with the nonfiction. Have I read more nonfiction than fiction? Because that would be nuts. For me, at least. No. No, I didn't. So one of the books I read this year was All About Love by Bell Hooks. And I've been reading this book for years, because it's nonfiction. Even though it took me a really long time. I think it's an absolutely unnecessary read for everyone. Like, I want to buy copies and gift it out to all the people in my life. And I annotated, I don't know if you can see this on camera, so many pages. I write and I dog-ear my pages because I love interacting with my books. This book so beautifully writes about love and how to reimagine love as a verb, and also how we can reimagine society if we put love first. Actually, I want to read you one of my favorite quotes from this book. That's a good one. Which quote should I choose? I have like 1,000 pages here bookmarked. What is speaking to me today? There's so many different components to this book, right? We have chapters on childhood love, we have how to give love, community love, grief, romance, all these different types of love, and it's just healing. It's so beautiful. Okay, so I'll read you this quote. When we see love as the will to nurture one's own or another's spiritual growth, revealed through acts of care, respect, knowing, and assuming responsibility, The foundation of all love in our life is the same. There is no special love exclusively reserved for romantic partners. Genuine love is the foundation of our engagement with ourselves, with family, with friends, with partners, with everyone we choose to love. Read this book if you like feminist nonfiction, if you like self-reflection, and if you want to change your perspective on love and reimagine what love could look like. So the next book is Making Livable Worlds, Afro-Puerto Rican Women Building Environmental Justice by Hilda Llorens, and I loved this book. I actually gave this book 5 stars, which might be the only nonfiction book I've ever given 5 stars. I really loved it. It is a ethnography. I want to read you her definition of it. To attempt to write decolonized ethnography, then, means to face the violence implicit in reducing people to abstract data, a process that disappears the embodied stories and experiences of people, our informants, the vast majority of whom already live marginalized lives that often render them extractable, disposable, and otherwise invisible to the academy and elite sectors of society. A decolonized ethnography seeks to center our informants' knowledge, experiences, insights, and observations alongside our own. So this book follows Afro-Boricuas, Black Puerto Ricans in the southeastern part of Puerto Rico, and it shows how they problem solve, how they advocate for environmental justice, and how they are environmentalists themselves. The book was a little academic in the beginning. There's 4 chapters in this book, so the first half is kind of like an overview of the methodology. It also gives a background on like Puerto Rico's economic and political sphere. You're also given a historical understanding of Black Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico. So you get to follow multiple women and their stories and their lives as they resist systems of oppression through life-sustaining and supportive strategies. So I 1000% recommend this book if you are interested in learning more about decolonization, about Black feminism, about environmental justice, if you're interested in ethnographies, or if you just want to learn more about Puerto Rico's history and culture. I would definitely recommend this book. So the next book and the last nonfiction book I have for you is Critical Race Theory, an Introduction. And this book is super quick to get through. It is about 160 pages plus a really in-depth glossary of terms for a lot of the words used in the book, which I think is really helpful for those who maybe are newer to social justice and just want to understand what CRT is. I think it's very digestible. It is not, this is the non-legal version. There is another book that is more legal heavy, but this one is more geared towards folks who are not lawyers or in the legal or criminal justice system. So CRT is a legal framework that addresses racism in the legal system. And even though there's still like a little bit of a legal slant because it's a legal framework, it's very understandable, it's very digestible. So this book gives a introduction to critical race theory. It discusses the power of narrative storytelling in the courtroom or in other settings, and it encourages reflection. It also goes over some of the critiques people have of CRT, and then it ends by discussing like where CRT is today and how it's perceived and what they foresee for CRT in the future. So at the end of each chapter, there are guiding questions and suggested readings. So if there's anything that you wanted to look into further, there are readings at the end of each chapter. And I found that the questions at the end of each chapter were really helpful for me to process the information and to reflect on how I could bring CRT into my life and my work. So one of the questions that I really liked, and I felt that it articulated something that I hadn't really been able to articulate myself. The question comes after the legal storytelling and narrative analysis chapter. The question is, do white people tell stories too, but deem them not stories at all, but the truth? I just think everyone should read this. I really do. Everyone should read this. So if you like racial justice, if you like learning more about the legal and criminal justice system, and if you like self-reflection, then I would definitely recommend CRT an Introduction. So let's move on to fiction. The very first book I read this year was Paradise by Abdulrazak Gurnah, and he He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2021. I wanted to pick up one of his books, and this was the one that I chose. So this is a historical fiction book, and this book follows a young boy, Yusef, and he is given to a businessman to settle his father's debts. So he moves from the interior of Zanzibar, which is present-day Tanzania, and brought to the coast where the businessman has a home and a shop that he runs. And so the first, I would say 2/3 of the book is a little slow moving because you have Yusef processing his new surroundings and explaining this new world that he's in. And then at about 2/3 of the way in, there's a lot more action. He gets to go on a trip to the interior of the country to learn trade, and there's just a lot of twists and turns that happen on this journey where you're just kind of like waiting to find out what happens to them. Through all of this, you're wondering, how is Yusef going to get free? Is he ever going to get a chance to live his life and make decisions for himself because he's kind of indentured to this businessman? Throughout all of these events, there's this looming presence of German colonization and how it's impacting life in Zanzibar. I thought that the writing was really, really beautiful. There was a lot of attention to detail and a lot of care in the world building that I really loved. There wasn't a lot of dialogue in the beginning, so it really gives you a sense for like what Yusef is feeling as his surroundings change and his life is changing. I also read on Goodreads that there are similarities between this book and stories in the Quran. However, I have not ever read a religious text in my life, so there could be like a lot more meaning to this if you understand those stories or were more knowledgeable about those stories. But even for me, I really enjoyed it. I would love to read more by this author. There are a lot of books that he's written, and I know that he has a lot of themes of colonialism in his work, which is something that I also like to read. So read this if you like African historical fiction, beautiful prose, and if you want to check out a Nobel Prize winning author. The next book I read was Olga Dies Dreaming by Xochitl Gonzalez, and I have so many feelings about this book. After reading it, I needed to talk about it so bad that I like burst into, my partner was working in the other room, I burst into the room and I was like, I need to talk about this right now. And this book was so hyped up. This book is written by a Puerto Rican Mexican author. And this book follows multiple point of views. We have Olga, who's a Puerto Rican woman and a wedding planner for the super wealthy. We have her brother, Prieto, who is a congressman and he has a hidden secret. And then we also have Richard, who is a billionaire. I don't like him. And then we have letters from Olga and Prieto's mother, Blanca, who is a former young lord, which was a Puerto Rican revolutionary movement in New York City in the 60s and 70s. She abandoned her children to fight for Puerto Rican independence. So there's just so much Puerto Rican history and culture written into this book. I'm actually gonna do a book review on this book, a video, probably in a couple of weeks, because there's so much I want to talk about. I want to do such a deep dive on this book, because like I said, I have a lot of feelings. I have a lot of feelings about this book. So read this if you like fiction, if you like multiple point of views, if you want to learn more about Puerto Rican history and culture. So the next book I read was One to Watch by Kate Stayman-London, and this is a romance novel, and I loved it. This book is kind of like a take on The Bachelorette, which is a show where you have multiple romantic interests competing for a main lead, and that ends in engagement. So in this book, instead of being called The Bachelorette, it's called The Main Squeeze, and this book follows B, who is a plus-size fashion blogger, and she kind of criticizes the show for not being diverse enough or inclusive enough, and she is chosen to be the next lead. And so it follows her feelings as she navigates fat phobia, as she works through self-doubt and comes to the realization that she deserves to be loved and she deserves to fall in love. I read this in like 2 to 3 days because I needed to know who she ended up with. It felt very much like an actual, like watching a season of The Bachelorette. So read this if you like The Bachelorette, if you like fun, quick romance books, and if you want to read about a brokenhearted lead who has her happily ever after. Next I have Blood Like Magic by Liselle Sambury. And I don't usually read YA or fantasy. This is an urban fantasy novel. But I discovered that I kind of love urban fantasy. This book follows Voya Thomas, who is very protective of her family and is also very, very indecisive. It's like her weakness. So this book is about Voya, who is from a long line of witches. Her entire family are witches, and it's a coming of age novel where she's about to receive her witch magic, and she has to go through a ritual called a calling, which is a task that an ancestor assigns so that she can receive her magic, but she can only receive that magic if she passes. So she's tasked with a really impossible task. There are unusually high stakes to this task, and she has a lot of inner turmoil about what to do. So what I loved most about this book was the family dynamic. I loved Voya's family so much. They were so fun, they were supportive, they were nosy, some of them were troublemaking, but like ultimately they were super lovable. I love a big cast of characters in a book, and I just really loved that each of the characters, each of her family members, they were so well written. They were very distinct from one another, which I loved because they each had their own quirks. And I also loved the world building and the magic system. So this book takes place in Toronto in the mid 21st century, so around, I think, like the 2050s. Oh, that's a weird number to say. And it's just like slightly futuristic, which was really fun. Also, Voya's family has ancestry from Trinidad, and there's infusion of Trinidadian cooking weaved into the story in a really beautiful way. I think it brought this book so much more life and love and magic, because I think in general, especially for nations that have a history of oppression and colonization, that the celebration of culture that continues is magic within itself. That the culture has continued to live on. I think that's really magical and beautiful. So I think that aspect adds a lot more to the story. I wasn't a big fan of the ending. I don't think all the storylines were nicely tied up, but that could be because this has a sequel. So read this if you like Black urban fantasy, if you like YA, intricate plot lines, and own voices novels. And then lastly, what I'm currently reading Fantasy Island, Colonialism, Exploitation, and the Betrayal of Puerto Rico by Ed Morales. It's nonfiction, so it might take me a little bit longer to get through this. I'm currently at page 30. And it's talking about the history of colonialism in Puerto Rico, the history of the $72 billion debt in Puerto Rico, and I am just really excited to see what else this book talks about. That's what I'm reading now. It'll probably be in my next wrap-up video. Alright, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, if you want to watch more of my videos, give this video a like, subscribe, turn on the notification bell to know when I drop new videos, and I will see you next Saturday. Bye.